The Indo-Europeans. The Indo-European Persians conquered the Semitic and the Egyptian world. The world of Egypt and Babylon and Assyria and Phoenicia had existed almost 30 centuries, and the venerable races of the Fertile Valley were getting old and tired. Their doom was sealed when a new and more energetic race appeared upon the horizon. We call this race the Indo-European race. These had conquered not only Europe, but also made itself a ruling class in the country which is now known as British India. These Indo-Europeans were white men like the Semites, but they spoke a different language, which is regarded as the common ancestor of all European tongues, with the exception of Hungarian and Finnish and the Basque dialects of northern Spain. When we first hear of them, they had been living among the shores of the Caspian Sea for many centuries, but one day they had packed their tents and they had wandered forth in search of a new home. Some of them had moved into the mountains of Central Asia, and for many centuries they had lived among the peaks which surrounded the plateau of Iran, and that is why we called them Aryans. Others had followed the setting sun, and they had taken possession of the plains of Europe. As I shall tell you, I give you the story of Greece and Rome. For the moment we must follow the Aryans. Under the leadership of Zephira, who was their great teacher, many of them had left their mountain homes to follow the swiftly flowing Indus River on its way to the sea. Others had preferred to stay among the hills of western Asia, and there they had founded the half-independent communities of the Medes and the Persians. Two people whose names we have copied from the old Greek history books. In the 7th century, before the birth of Christ, the Medes had established a kingdom of their own called Media, and this perished when Cyrus, the chief of a clan known as the Anshan, made himself king of all the Persian tribes and started upon a career of conquest which soon made him and his children the undisputed masters of the whole of Western Asia and of Egypt. Indeed, with such energy did these Indo-European Persians push for triumphant campaigns into the west, and they soon found themselves in serious difficulty with certain other Indo-European tribes, which centuries before had moved into Europe and had taken possession of the Greek peninsula and the islands of the Aegean Sea. These difficulties led to 3 famous wars between Greece and Persia, during which King Darius and King Xerxes of Persia invaded the northern part of the peninsula. They ravaged the lands of the Greeks and tried very hard to get a foothold upon the European continent. But in this they did not succeed. The navy of Athens proved unconquerable. By cutting off the lines of supplies of the Persian armies, the Greek sailors invariably forced the Asiatic rulers to return to their base. It was the first encounter between Asia, the ancient teacher, and Europe, the young and eager pupil. A great many of other chapters of this book will tell you how the struggle between East and West has continued until this very day. The Aegean Sea. The people of the Aegean Sea carried the civilization of old Asia into the wilderness of Europe. When Heinrich Schliemann was a little boy, his father told him the story of Troy. He liked that story better than anything else he had ever heard, and he made up his mind that as soon as he was big enough to leave home, he would travel to Greece and find Troy. That he was the son of a poor country parson in a Mecklenburg village did not bother him. He knew that he would need money, but he decided to gather a fortune first and do the digging afterwards. As a matter of fact, he managed to get a large fortune within a very short time, and as soon as he had enough money to equip an expedition, he went to the northwest corner of Asia Minor, where he supposed that Troy had been situated. In that particular nook of old Asia Minor stood a high mound covered with grain fields. According to tradition, it had been the home of Priamus, the king of Troy. Schliemann, whose enthusiasm was somewhat greater than his knowledge, wasted no time in preliminary explorations, and at once he began to dig. He dug with such zeal and such speed that his trench went straight through the heart of the city for which he was looking, and carried him to the ruins of another buried town which was at least 1,000 years older than the Troy of which Homer had written. Then something very interesting occurred. If Schliemann had found a few polished stone hammers, perhaps a few pieces of crude pottery, no one would have been surprised. Instead of discovering such objects, which people had generally associated with prehistoric men who had lived in these regions before the coming of the Greeks, Shillman found beautiful statues and very costly jewelry and ornamented vases of pattern that was unknown to the Greeks. He ventured the suggestion that fully 10 centuries before the Great Trojan War, the coast of the Aegean had been inhabited by a mysterious race of men who in many ways had been the superiors of the wild Greek tribes who had invaded their country and had destroyed their civilization or absorbed it until it had lost all trace of originality. And this proved to be the case. In the late 70s of the last century, Shillman visited the ruins of Mycenae, ruins which were so old that Roman guidebooks marveled at their antiquity. There again, beneath the flat slabs of stone of a small round enclosure, Shillman stumbled upon a wonderful treasure trove which had been left behind by those mysterious people who had covered the Greek coast with their cities, and who had built walls so big and so heavy and so strong that the Greeks called them the work of the Titans, those godlike giants who in very olden days would used to play ball with mountain peaks. A very careful study of these many relics had done away with some of the romantic features of the story. The makers of these early works of art and the builders of these strong fortresses were no sorcerers, the simple sailors and traders. They had lived in Crete and on the many small islands of the Aegean Sea. They had been hardy mariners, and they had turned the Aegean into a center of commerce for the exchange of goods between the highly civilized East and the slowly developing wilderness of the European mainland. For more than 1,000 years they had maintained an island empire which had developed a very high form of art. Indeed, their most important city, Canas, on the northern coast of Crete, had been entirely modern in its insistence upon hygiene and comfort. The palace had been properly drained, and the houses had been provided with stoves, and the Canossians had been the first people to make a daily use of the hitherto unknown bathtub. The palace of her kings had been famous for its winding staircases and its large banqueting hall. The cellars underneath this palace, where the wine and the grain and the olive oil were stored, had been so vast and had so greatly impressed the first Greek visitors that they had given rise to the story of the labyrinth, the name which we give to a structure with so many complicated passages that it is almost impossible to find our way out, once the front door is closed upon our frightened selves. But what finally came to this great Aegean empire, and what caused its sudden downfall, that I cannot tell. The Cretans were familiar with the art of writing, but no one has yet been able to decipher their inscriptions. Their history, therefore, is unknown to us. We have to reconstruct the record of their adventures from the ruins which the Aegeans have left behind. These ruins make it clear that the Aegean world was suddenly conquered by a less civilized race, which had recently come from the plains of northern Europe. Unless we are very much mistaken, the savages who were responsible for the destruction of the Cretan and Aegean civilizations were none other than certain tribes of wandering shepherds who had just taken possession of a rocky peninsula between Antarctica and the Aegean seas, who are known to us as Greeks. The Greeks. Meanwhile, the Indo-European tribe of the Hellenes was taking possession of Greece. The pyramids were 1,000 years old and were beginning to show the first signs of decay. And Hammurabi, the wise king of Babylon, had been dead and buried several centuries, when a small tribe of shepherds left their home along the banks of the river Danube and wandered southward in search of fresh pastures. They called themselves Hellenes, after Helen, the son of Deucalion, and Priya. According to the old myths, these were the only 2 human beings who had escaped the Great Flood, which countless years before had destroyed all the people of the world, when they had grown so wicked that they disgusted Zeus, the mighty god who lived on Mount Olympus. Of these early Hellenes we know nothing. Thucydides, the historian of the fall of Athens, described his earliest ancestors, said that they did not amount to very much, and this was probably true. They were very ill-mannered. They lived like pigs and threw the bodies of their enemies to the wild dogs who guarded their sheep. They had very little respect of other people's rights, and they killed the natives of the Greek peninsula, who were called the Pelagians, and stole their farms, and took their cattle, and made their wives and daughters slaves, and wrote endless songs praising the courage of the clan of the Ageans, who had led the Hellenic advance guard in the mountains of Thessaly and P. But here and there, on the top of high rocks, they saw the castles of the Ageans. Those they did not attack, for they feared the metal swords and the spears of the Agean soldiers, knew that they could not hope to defeat with their clumsy stone axes. For many centuries they continued to wander from valley to valley, and from mountainside to mountainside. When the whole of the land had been occupied, the migration had come to an end. That moment was the beginning of Greek civilization. The Greek farmer, living within sight of the Agean colonies, was finally driven by curiosity to visit his haughty neighbors. He discovered that he could learn many useful things from the men who dwelt behind the high stone walls of Messene and Tiryns. He was a clever pupil. Within a short time he mastered the art of handling those strange iron weapons which the Ageans had brought from Babylon and from Thebes. He came to understand the mysteries of navigation. He began to build little boats for his own use. And when he had learned everything the Ageans could teach him, he turned upon his teachers and drove them back to their islands. Soon afterward he ventured forth upon the sea and conquered all the cities of the Agean. Finally, in the 15th century before our era, he plundered and ravaged Knossos, and 10 centuries after their first appearance upon the scene of Hellenes were the undisputed rulers of Greece, of the Aegean, and of the coastal regions of Asia Minor. Troy, the last great commercial stronghold of older civilization, was destroyed in the 11th century BC. European history was to begin in all seriousness.